Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. Why I'm not able to share? Okay, I'll just leave and I'll come back. Okay. Chapter 6, Transcendental Morality. From the beginning of his life, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was known and respected for his high moral character, which was considered the minimal qualification of a gentleman, what to speak of a sadhu. At that time, traditional morality or the generic dharma described in Shastra was becoming increasingly fused with the atheistic utilitarian ideal that the ethical value of conduct is determined by its results. The end justifies the means. Actions were deemed virtuous if they tended to produce the greatest weal, greatest benefit for the largest number of people. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was not constrained by worldly moralism, whether traditional, mundanely religious, or newfangled. He taught that real morality means acting for Krishna's pleasure, which alone constitutes the supreme good, because morals devoid of Shuddha Bhakti are but eudaimonistic. Eudaimonism means a theory that the highest ethical goal is pleasure and personal well-being. Selfish, just selfish sense enjoyment. Or but eudaimonistic social norms meant to genteelly bind conditioned souls in Maya. In an aristocratic manner, bind the conditioned souls in Maya. This transcendental outlook on morality, quite different from that of the mundane, was explained in Professor Sanyal's Sri Krishna Chaitanya. Professor Sanyal, Professor Nishikanta Sanyal, was a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So he wrote this book, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, which was thoroughly reviewed and revised by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Chapter 19. Too rigid empiric morality obstructs spiritual awakening more effectively than even confirmed immorality. This is due to want of humility and spirit of submission to the sadhu that is sure to be engendered more or less by the dogmatic professor of conventional morality. True morality is never possible prior to spiritual awakening. That which passes as morality in the society of worldlings is only a hypocritical and therefore more dangerous form of immorality. The moral instinct proper, which belongs to the soul, must not be confounded with this hypocritical immorality and its conventions, It is not possible for a person to be really and fully moral before he realizes the nature of his true self. It is not, of course, intended to undervalue the principle of morality in any way. That instinct in its pure form, as in the case of every other instinct, belongs to the soul. The form in which it passes currently in the world is only the perverted reflection of the real principle and is not conducive to spiritual life. Its apparent advantages are strictly confined to this perverted existence. That means the apparent advantage of being materialistically moral are experienced only within this world of matter. Whatever tends to reconcile us to the worldly life stands self-condemned for that very reason. Empiric morality is fully open to this charge of pandering to the unspiritual life. Empiric morality means materialistic morality. So in materialistic morality, you're simply living a life that is profoundly unspiritual. As a matter of fact, neither conventional morality nor conventional immorality are praised by the sadhus, as by themselves they stand without any relation to the truth. As soon as our conduct gets related to the truth, it assumes its natural state, which has nothing to do with either the conventional moral or immoral principle of this world. To call the spiritual conduct as merely moral in the ordinary conventional sense of the word would therefore be wholly misleading. The spiritual conduct is no doubt perfectly wholesome, being free from all affinity with the unwholesome things of this world. The so-called moral conduct based on worldly experience owes all its value to its worldly utility. This fact categorically differentiates spiritual purity from worldly morality. There is, of course, no possibility of immoral conduct on the spiritual plane. In the absence of all possibility of immorality, there is no scope for worldly morality in the realm of the absolute. The kingdom of Godhead accommodates all varieties of conduct by endowing all of them with perfect wholesomeness. Can such conduct be appropriately called moral in the conventional sense of the term? Is it possible for the ethical mind to conceive of a state of existence that is infinitely higher than any conceivable worldly moral excellence? End of quote. Lack of understanding of such subtle ethics gave rise to the frequent accusation that Krishna himself was immoral, especially in his dealings with the gopis. This topic, which unenlightened moralists could not but mistake as being improper, was definitively explained in The Erotic Principle and Unalloyed Devotion, a harmonist article by Professor Sanyal, in terms of the transcendental morality of recognizing Krishna as a superlative enjoyer. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati encapsulated this issue while on Rajmandal Parikrama. By confiscating the clothes of the gopis, Krishna obtained happiness. That is Krishna's sense happiness, the sense gratification. I cannot object. Let us see Krishna display sense control in his own conduct. Why is he a sense enjoyer? Krishna will not become a slave to my whims. If he so wills, supremely independent Krishna can demonstrate sense restraint, as he did in his form as Gauranga. By that example, he informs us that Krishna's devotees do not have the right to steal the gopis' clothing. Only Krishna has that prerogative. Our duty is to act at our level of eligibility. Very, very commonly taught by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Our duty is to act at our level of eligibility, accepting everything conducive for Krishna's service and thus attempting to assist him in his enjoyment with his devotees. End of quote. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati shocked the challenging professor Albert E. Suthers of Ohio State University by upholding the Gaudiya conception of morality as superior to that of Christianity. The flabbergasted professor inquired, how can your holiness statements be reconciled with the descriptions of Krishna's amorous sports? Quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Krishna's loving affairs are not temporal like the lustful romances of dramatic heroes and heroines such as Romeo and Juliet, or even of ideal spouses. Lust as prevalent in this world is merely a mental passion, whereas the lust of the transcendental world has its own form. Here, lust is always goaded by the enemy, one of the six passions, whereas in the transcendental region of Krishna, the loveliness of his spiritual body ever drives the lust for Krishna, which takes the form as sublimated love or the desire to gratify the immaculate senses of Krishna. Krishna is pure, Krishna's senses are also pure. So the desire to satisfy Krishna, the pure senses of Krishna, that is actually pure love. Krishna's amorous sports are not to be called indecency because Krishna is the only one unrivaled enjoyer, embodiment of real truth and spiritual despot. Professor Sudhas, I cannot fully appreciate this. Please let me understand it a little more clearly. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Suppose there are some angles, 2 right angles, 4 right angles, and so forth. There is a contracted character of a corner in the acute, obtuse, and right angle. But in the 2 right angles called the straight angle, even though called an angle, there is no contractedness or want of straightness as with angles in general. Such is the case with the autocrat Krishna. There is no want of contractedness or straightness or despicable character or indecorousness in the perfect entity Krishna, like the perfect circle of 360 degrees. Though the communities of enjoyers or renouncers championing morality or immorality may, due to the meagerness of their intellect, wrongly regard the lustfulness of Krishna, the quality of that despotism that is his right alone as vulgar, like that of common men and other creatures. End of quote. Elsewhere, Srila Saraswati Thakur declared, being perfected and increased millions of times, the topmost morality propagated by Mahatma Jesus Christ is anxiously waiting to serve the morality of love of Godhead as cultivated by Vaishnavas. Genuine devotees of Krishna are never inclined toward immorality. All desirable ethics are totally pledged to the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, the very form of dharma. The highest ethical principle and science for the jiva is attachment to the Supreme Lord, the ultimate limit of which is found only in devotees of Krishna. End of quote. Equally controversial was the practical application of this transcendental approach to morality. Even devotees of Krishna who were endeavoring to establish the highest principles sometimes felt constrained to adjust to the ways of a wicked and unbenign world. Hence, the Gaudiya Math members, especially those involved in management, had to be sufficiently worldly wise to deal with cheats, liars, ruffians, and other such less savory characters whose paths they inevitably crossed. In everyday dealings, Gaudiya Math members experience that what is required to serve Krishna sometimes contradicts the course of ordinary righteousness. While understandable that to achieve anything in this world, especially in the modern age of duplicity and hypocrisy, one is occasionally obliged to contravene the principles of standard morality. Such apparent ethical departures by sadhus tended to arouse the ire, the anger of hypocritical prigs. Hypocritical people. When a Grihastha disciple who was visiting him during a tour requested permission to leave, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati suggested that he remain longer. But the disciple replied that he had to return to his hometown to attend his office. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati proposed that he simply submit a report of sickness and stay. A local lawyer who was present strongly remonstrated, strongly criticized. You're a sadhu, priding yourself on representing the truth. And this is how you teach your disciples to tell lies? The lawyer stormed out, whereupon, becoming inconsolably disturbed, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati completely desisted from speaking with anyone and from eating. That evening, Bhakti Saranga Prabhu returned to find the whole camp plunged in gloom. He had been outside, busy in collection and organizational matters, but now learning of the exigency, he asked for the lawyer's address and said, "Give me the car." Barging into the lawyer's residence as soon as the door was opened, Bhakti Saranga Prabhu immediately took up the issue. Imagine if you saw robbers approaching your house and your wife was heavily ornamented. Naturally, you would hide her. If after looting whatever vegetables they could find, the crooks asked if there was anything more, would you bring out your wife? The lawyer had to admit no. Bhaktisaranga Prabhu proceeded to explain that in the same way, the need of a conditioned soul to hear from and associate with the pure devotee is so overwhelming that it must be had at any cost, notwithstanding minor infringements of social niceties. Now, even in the scriptures, in the Mahabharata, in Bhagavatam also, it is pointed out that there are 5 types of untruthfulness, which is not degrading. Panchandritanyapi apatakani. Basically, all of them deal with if it is a crisis for others, if it is a life crisis for others, these things have to be taken into consideration. There is, in fact, Baladev Vidyabhushan has defined what is Satyam. He says, based on the definitions coming from the scripture, Yathartha Bhashanam Bhutahita Karamcha Satyam. To speak that which is corresponding to the facts when it is beneficial to others, that is the principle of truthfulness. This is elaborated in Mahabharata, other places also. Even Lord Ramachandra, who always stood for the truth and honesty, on 2 occasions, both for others' benefit, he spoke untruth. One was so that his father could continue to live. Another was when the Brahmanas who were following him to the forest, to prevent them from becoming even further disturbed, he had to deceive them. So if there is some life crisis, specifically somebody else's life crisis, Pranakrishna is called. This is Paraprana Krishna. This is somebody else's life crisis for others' sake. Then, and only in that particular situation, then being untruthful is supremely beneficial. So this is recognized. In other words, if you want to follow principles of morality outside of the principles that are presented in the Vedic scriptures, you will not be able to permanently benefit yourself. There is this instance, Lord Krishna teaches this to Arjuna in Mahabharata in one place. He talks about an ascetic. Talks about an ascetic who was in his ashram, and that was an innocent person who was being chased by some thieves. This innocent person asked this ascetic for refuge. So put him in the ashram, kept him safe. Then when the thieves came and asked this ascetic, did such and such a person come? He said yes, and he showed him, here is this person. Then the thieves came and they did whatever they wanted to do. And Lord Krishna told Arjuna that this ascetic, he didn't go to heaven, nor did he get any spiritual benefit. Rather, he went to a special hell and he was especially punished because he had committed great adharma. So one has to consider these factors. So this is a very important point. Bhaktisaranga Prabhu proceeded to explain that in the same way, the need of a conditioned soul to hear from and associate with the pure devotee is so overwhelming that it must be had at any cost, notwithstanding minor infringements of social niceties. The lawyer got the point. He then wrote back with Bhaktisaranga Prabhu to see Srila Saraswati Thakur. At a bazaar along the way, he purchased a basket of fruit. On arriving in Srila Saraswati Thakur's presence, he profusely apologized for his indiscretion and presented the fruit, which Srila Saraswati Thakur graciously accepted. Such departures from ordinary morality. Here, ordinary morality always refers to what is conventionally understood to be morality. That is not necessarily scriptural morality. There is something called scriptural morality, and there is non-scriptural morality. Non-scriptural morality will take you nowhere in the long run. In the long run always means in your afterlife, in your next life. Such departures from ordinary morality were happily seized upon by niggling prudes. By petty people who were excessively attentive to decorum, who were ever alert to find even a reflection of fault in sadhus, and on that basis reject everything that saintly person stood for. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, a word, stated that sadhus are adhokshajavadis, but those who criticize him are akshajavadis, those who see through worldly vision or empiricists. An expression that he often used, akshajavadi, akshajavad. The idea that we only believe what we see. I will only accept the evidence of pratyaksha, sense perception, or of course, logical inference, anuman, which is just built upon pratyaksha. On the other hand, there is adhokshajavada, those who accept the reality that has been revealed by the Supreme Godhead, who's beyond the range of our senses and mind and intelligence. So genuine saintly persons, they go by the principles that are revealed by superior authorities. Whereas akshajavadis, or ordinary materialistic people, they see through worldly vision. They're empirical. They only accept what their protection and anumana teaches them. What is this? In a lecture, he cited several examples of devotees acting against standard codes of proper behavior. Quote, when Krishna appeared as the child of Vasudeva, Vasudeva misled Kamsa by pretending that Devaki had given birth to a female child. Vasudeva was duplicitous for the sake of Krishna. While performing Kirtan in Srivas Thakur's house one evening, Lord Chaitanya told Srivas, today I do not feel ecstasy in chanting. Is someone hiding here? Srivas then found his mother-in-law crouching behind a basket, whereupon he grabbed her by the hair and threw her outside. Similarly, Srivas once allowed an austere brahmachari to hide in his home to see Lord Chaitanya's dancing. When Lord Chaitanya asked if any unknown person was present, Srivas answered yes, a pure brahmachari who subsisted only on milk. But Lord Chaitanya told Srivas, drive him away. Merely by drinking milk, one does not qualify to attain me. Unquote. He explained that worldly moralizers might consider Vasudeva a liar and Lord Chaitanya and his followers fanatical, sectarian, and intolerant. He explained that worldly moralizers who might consider Vasudeva a liar and Lord Chaitanya and his followers fanatical, sectarian, and intolerant can never understand the minds of the Lord and his devotees. On another occasion, quote, there is no dharma at all in subjects enjoyed by the masses. Whatever ethics or morality exists within the universe and whatever external dharma is present are not pure truth. All dharma, all truth is situated at Mahaprabhu's lotus feet. On hearing this, people may say that I'm crazy, but I don't mind. Let them say that I have given up the correct path and gone in the opposite direction. I will continue on the opposite path. End of quote. During Srila Saraswati Thakur's visit to Dhaka in April 1935, a group of scholars came to hear from him, and one of them, the Sanskrit professor Sri Yukta Abhay Chandra, MA, opened the conversation by stating that as a result of modern education, today's students were becoming misbehaved, vulgar, and immoral, and thus it was not possible to speak to them about devotion to God, which they snorted at as if it were a laughing matter, which they criticized, which they ridiculed, without first giving religious instruction. Moral standards could not be established. In reply, Srila Saraswati Thakur spoke at length to establish that the proper process is not to first become moral, then take to bhakti. For genuine morality is a byproduct of bhakti. Kleshagni, Shubhada, Moksha Lugata Krit, Sudurlabha, Sandrananda Visheshatma, Sri Krishna Karshani Chesa. When we study the nectar of devotion, we come across this. And we execute pure devotion service to Krishna, then we naturally experience two effects of pure bhakti in the status of sadhana itself. We experience freedom from distress, which is the result of our material propensities, vasanas, which also disappear and which are themselves caused due to avidya, our spiritual ignorance, which will also disappear. All at the status of pure sadhana bhakti itself. That is only one effect of pure sadhana bhakti. The other effect of pure sadhana bhakti is shubhada, is expressed by the word shubhada. One experiences, one develops auspicious moral qualities, all of these: truthfulness, cleanliness, austerity, all of these will be manifested automatically if one is executing pure sadhana bhakti. And that morality professed as a principle independent of bhakti is actually godlessness, as is the conception of religion being a practice meant primarily to uphold morality. Continuing, he retold an instance from his student life, how in a lecture about the necessity of dharma, the principal of the Sanskrit college stated that even without consideration of any god, it is possible to lead a moral life, and that he, Siddhanta Saraswati, later privately protested to the principle that godless morality could only be opportunism or materialism, and thus could benefit neither the individual nor society at large. He cited Black's Self-Culture, the prescribed book at the college that compared godless or humanistic morality to living in a kingdom without recognizing the authority of the king. Dharmam to sakshat bhagavat pranita. Now, even if you say this is spiritual dharma, bhagavata dharma, what about ordinary dharma, samanya dharma, sadharana dharma? Even ordinary dharma comes from the Veda. Veda pranihito dharma. Veda pranihito dharmo hyadharmastad viparyaya. That which is prescribed in the four Vedas, that is dharma. That which is prohibited in the Vedas is adharma. Vedo Narayana Sakshat Swayambhu Riti Shushuma. And these Vedas are not different from Lord Narayana because they have emanated from him. While establishing that Shuddha Bhakti was far above and of a wholly different nature than ordinary worldly morality, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati strongly contested pseudo-devotees taking Vaishnava Dharma as an excuse for eschewing, giving up conventional moral fidelity. He stated, the character of persons engaged in spiritual life is never devoid of morals. Individuals opposed to morality and those fallen from morality are never fit to be called spiritualists. Licentiousness can never be bhakti. There's no place for anyabhilashita, adharma, in Shuddha Bhakti. Chapter 7, Vaishnavism and Vedic literature. The authority of Shruti over Smriti was accepted as axiomatic by almost all traditional Vedic scholars and also affirmed by Gaudiyas. However, Arya Samajis and a few others took the extreme stance of recognizing only Shruti and not Smriti as genuine Shastra. They particularly stressed study of the Upanishads, which they venerated as the cream of Shruti, while rejecting the Puranas as non-Vedic, as mere stories meant for persons insufficiently intelligent to tackle the high philosophy of the Upanishads. Thus, they equated the Vaishnavas giving prominence to the Puranas as being symptomatic of unscholarly, naive sentimentalism. But Vaishnava Acharyas had always contested such claims. Always. From the leading authorities of the four Vaishnava lines, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Nimbarka. In the Vishnu Swami line, we have Vallabhacharya. Everybody very strongly they provided evidence that actually the Itihasas and Puranas they clarify the meaning of the Veda. Itihasa Puranabhyam Vedam Sam Upabrimhayet. This is a statement directly found in the Vedas. One should get a clarification of the teachings of the Veda from a study of the Itihasas and Puranas. But Vaishnava Acharyas had always contested such claims, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was heir to this controversy. Especially in his addressing learned non-Vaishnavas, a recurrent theme was the misunderstanding that Vaishnavism in general and Gaudiya Vaishnavism in particular is non-Vedic and therefore not on par with the philosophical lucubrations laborious or intensive studies of those who deem themselves distinguished Vedic authorities. In reply to such challenges, Srila Saraswati Thakur highlighted Gaudiya appreciation of the Upanishads and simultaneously upheld the Vedic status of the Puranas. He cited that Srila Jiva Goswami, the accepted philosophical authority for the Gaudiyas, had in his canonic Sandarbhas quoted widely from the Upanishads. And another great Gaudiya Acharya, Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, had not only prepared his Govinda Bhashya on Vedanta Sutra with profuse quotations from the Upanishads, but also personally commented on 10 principal Upanishads, out of which his commentary to the Isha Upanishad is intact. I mean, it's available. There are devotees who are wondering what happened to the remaining. At least we know one devotee scholar, Dr. Damian Martins, who has dedicated his life to searching out manuscripts of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan's writings. That could be anywhere, hunting for them personally. But the other Vaishnava lines, Madhvacharya commented on all the 10 Upanishads. In the Ramanuja school, Vedanta Deshika commented on the Isha Upanishad, and his follower Rangaramanuja commented on the remaining. In the Nimbarka line also I've seen and I do have a copy of a commentary on the 10 Upanishads. The Vedanta Sutra itself has been provided by Vyasadeva in order to clarify the teachings of the Upanishads. The Vedanta Sutra is divided into 4 chapters, adhyayas, and each chapter or adhyaya is divided into a quarter, pada, and each pada or quarter is divided into several sections, each section containing 1 or more sutras on a particular topic. For each section, there is a Vishaya Vakya. Each section is dealing with some particular statement in the Upanishads. So the Vedanta Sutra itself is an analysis of key statements from the Upanishads. So when we study the Vedanta Sutra, we'll come across this. I have a desire, if Hari Guru Vaishnavas bless that next year have an introduction to Vedanta Darshan course on the 10 Upanishads, Baladev Vidyabhushan's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, and Govinda Bhashya. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati referenced Shruti to refute the off-cited claim that unlike Shruti, the Puranas are not apaurushaya, supramundane. He quoted Itihasa Purana Panchama Vedanam Vedaha, Chandogya Upanishad, which terms the Puranas and Itihasas, including Mahabharata, as a fifth Veda, and also reiterated how in his Tattva Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami has established Srimad Bhagavatam as a supreme Vedic evidence. This would be very much worth studying. Srila Jiva Goswami wrote 7 Sandarbhas: Tattva Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, Bhakti Sandarbha, Priti Sandarbha, and Krama Sandarbha. The first 6 are thematic analysis on particular topics, and the last one is called Krama Sandarbha. It is a sequential analysis of the Bhagavatam verses. That means as the Bhagavatam flows, like that, he presents it. So Tattva Sandarbha is the first Sandarbha, and it has 2 parts. The first part is called Pramana Khanda. It deals with the sources of valid knowledge. And there, Srila Jiva Goswami starts by discussing what are sources of valid knowledge, what are pramanas, especially pramanas with which we can understand transcendental reality. And then step by step, he presents arguments that ultimately conclude with the statement that Srimad Bhagavatam is the highest source of factual knowledge to understand everything pertaining to reality. He also presented an appendix to the first 4 sandarbhas called Sarva Samvadini, where he goes into the complicated discussions of philosophy. Conversely, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had to address the erroneous outlook of those supposed Gaudiyas who considered study of the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra impersonal speculation, and thus not above but below their level of realization. Notwithstanding that acharyas of all recognized Vaishnava Sampradayas had composed commentaries on these words, certain Sahajiya groups, under the misconception that real devotees discuss only Leela and never philosophy, most offensively regarded even Govinda Bhashya as loathsome philosophical ideation. As just some kind of speculation, not worthy of much respect. And acharyas of the caliber of Srila Baladeva Vidyabhushan are not pure devotees, but mixed, whose approach to bhakti was tainted by non-devotional jnana. These are all some ridiculous misconceptions that Sahajiyas who trained to be Gaudiya Vaishnavas, where these were some ideas that they were propagating. Following the previous Vaishnava acharyas who gave paramount importance to Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, while also upholding the dignity of the other Puranas, the Upanishads, and other Vedic texts. Srila Saraswati Thakur explicated that the root of all fallacies concerning these scriptures was the miscomprehension of the nature, scope, and purpose of Vedic knowledge and literature. In the course of a long discussion at the residence of the learned and inquisitive Zamindar, Shri Sharadindu Narayan Rai, Srila Saraswati Thakur addressed the contention of those Prakrita Sahajiyas who criticized the Vedas, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, and other such Shastras as lower than Srimad Bhagavatam and thus largely irrelevant. He narrated an explanation given to him by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur that these scriptures are of the same quality as Srimad Bhagavatam and thus never to be disrespected, and further clarified that particular passages in scriptures such as Mahabharata might be bewildering to asuras, karmis, jnanis, and false devotees, but not to sufficiently qualified devotees, and that those Vedic mantras that apparently do not describe Vishnu, in fact, do so exclusively. Yet, unless understood through Vidvan, through an understanding of the usage of the spiritually enlightened will indubitably, will certainly be misunderstood. Okay, I need to explain what this means, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur often brought out these points. These points were brought out earlier on by Sri Paladev Vidyabhushan and Srila Jiva Goswami also. It's not that they didn't bring it out. Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes that the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta Sutra, they all teach Shuddha Bhakti. But there is a distinction between the superficial meaning of the scriptures and the intended meaning of scriptures. The superficial meaning of the scriptures might be to encourage karmis, jnanis, yogis. But the scriptures also point out, Sarve Veda Yat Padamam Ananti. All the Vedas talk about how to attain the abode of the Supreme Lord. Vedeshya Sarvair Ahameva Vedyaha. By all the Vedas, I alone am to be known, understood, and realized. Vede Ramayane Chaiva, Purane Bharate Tatha, Adau Ante Cha Madhye Cha, Haris Sarvatra Giyate. In the Vedas, in the Ramayana, in the Puranas, in the Mahabharata, in the beginning, in the middle, in the end, Lord Hari has been glorified everywhere. Harivamsha statement. These are all very commonly known. We understand that all the scriptures or jnanis or yogis. Traigunya Vishaya Veda. The Vedas primarily deal with subject matters that are interesting to persons within the three modes of material nature. But the actual intent of Vedic Shastra is actually bhakti. This is clarified in the Uddhava Gita also by Lord Krishna. Kim vidatte, kim achaste. What do the Vedas mean when they present all these prescriptions? What do they convey? And then Lord Krishna says, Mam vidatte. They talk about me. So the Vedic scriptures are actually uniformly presented by the Supreme Lord. They have been breathed out by the Supreme Lord. So, but it has been, they are presented in a manner to be appealing to different levels of persons who accept Vedic authority. So that gradually over lifetimes they can come on. Sharadindu Babu expressed a common doubt that the language of the Puranas reveals them as modern compositions in contrast to the Vedas, which by linguistic analysis appears to be much older. Academic scholars have this misconception, and practicing devotees should not develop these misconceptions. In reply, Srila Saraswati Thakur gave the example that a person's body remains the same when he changes his attire. Similarly, although the Puranas are sometimes lost and then represented anew in varying forms and idioms suitable to changing circumstances, their fundamental nature remains intact. Hence, to classify the Puranas as modern is as childish as thinking that the sun arisen today is new and different from that seen by our forefathers. Rather, the Puranas are the older Shastras and have no actual appearance or disappearance. In fact, Srila Jiva Goswami, he points out that there is something called the Brahma Yajna. When a sacrifice is conducted, there are different things that are meant to be done. And one of the things that are meant to be done according to I'm talking of Shruti, just according to the injunctions of Shruti itself, is that there has to be a discussion on the Puranas. Now, if the Puranas did not exist, say 1 million years back, then how would this statement be there in the Shruti? Shruti is acknowledged as being Anadi Ananta. no beginning, no end, indicating the race course opposite Sharadendu Babu's house. Srila Saraswati Thakur offered another analogy. If through the window one espies a jockey and steed go past, he would not consider that the moment they crossed his vision constituted their total span of existence. You see a horse rider in a horse, they're going past. You see them at a particular second, and for a few seconds you see them, and then they go out. You cannot see them because your window is limited. You would not say that, oh, at that particular moment, that horse and the horse rider took birth. And when they crossed, you will not say that they both died. He would realize that he had caught only a glimpse of them, that their existence began before his seeing them and would continue into the future. Basing his arguments on those given by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Tattva-Sandarbha, Srila Saraswati Thakur further explicated that Purana means the oldest, and that the Puranas eternally coexist with the Vedas, and thus are known as the fifth Veda. Purana, Purana. The term Purana comes from the word Purana, completion, supplement. It supplements. The Puranas are so named because they clarify, supplement, or resolve points not self-evident in the Vedas. Sharadendu Babu profusely thanked Srila Saraswati Thakur for purifying his home and cited, I came to scoff, I came to criticize, but stayed to pray, admitting that he needed to unlearn everything he had learned throughout his life. The language and style of the Upanishads being dissimilar to that of the Puranas, they were often disregarded as a disparate genre of literature. They were considered to be a different category of literature. Now, even in today's world, I'm talking of the English speaking world. If you go to a court and you actually get to hear the arguments that are being presented and the judgments that are being pronounced, you'll find it to be a very different type of language than the ordinary language you hear in the street, at home, and elsewhere. You will not say that language is older and so on. It parallelly exists. Even in a place like America. If you just open any plaint, or if you open any defense, or if you open any court judgment, you'll find it has a particular dialect. Let me say like that. It's a legal dialect. So similarly, Sanskrit has Shruti dialect, and it has a Laukika dialect. This is understood in the Sanskrit grammatical tradition. There is something called ordinary Laukiki, worldly Sanskrit. And there is something called Vedic Sanskrit, that which occurs in the four Vedas. The rules are slightly different also. It's a different dialect. But just because it's a different dialect doesn't mean it came later or came earlier and so on. They're parallelly existing. It's like even in today's world, legal English parallelly exists along with ordinary street English. The Upanishads consist largely of philosophical abstrusities. Philosophical complicated statements that to supposed Gyanis appear to uphold spiritual non-differentiation as the goal of the Vedas. But such Gyanis penchant for cultivating knowledge meant for achieving such impersonal realization was condemned by Vaishnavas as a blunder and major obstacle on the path of understanding the actual truth described in the Vedas. But such Gyani's fantasy for cultivating knowledge in order to attain some kind of impersonal realization was always condemned by Vaishnavas. I'll just give a simple example. This is a book called Vedanta Sangraha by Ramanujacharya. I will not go into all kinds of details, but I will just read out the first. I'll just read out only this much portion and explain what it means, wherein he summarizes the teachings of the Upanishads. Ashesha Jagadhitanushasana Shrutinikara Shirasi Samadhigatoyam Arthaha. The teaching enshrined in the crest jewels of the Shruti, that refers to the Upanishads, is as follows. Now, these Upanishads, they contain instructions for the benefit of the entire universe. Jiva Paramatma Yathatmya Jnana Purvaka Varnashrama Dharma Itikartavyataka Paramapurusha Charana Yugala Dhyanarchana Pranamadi Atyartha Priyaha Tad Prapti Phalaha. After one understands the nature of the Jivatma, after one understands the nature of the Supreme Lord, when one carries out his Varnashrama Dharma properly, when he engages in the meditation, worship of the lotus feet of the Supreme Person, offers obeisances unto him, and engages in other aspects of devotion service unto him, then he will experience extreme pleasure, and he will attain the result. The result that he will attain will be, he will attain that Supreme Personality of Godhead's eternal service. Now, in various ways, the Upanishads teach us that particular teaching, and then he gives some quotations also. And afterwards, he says that the living entity is pure, and he is spiritual, and he is eternally dependent on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and so on. Now, how does one get to the point of liberation? When one understands the transcendental attributes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose transcendental qualities are unbounded and without any limit. So, to help us understand the nature of the Supreme Lord, the Shrutis, the Upanishads specifically, glorify the Supreme Lord in several ways, directly and indirectly. And they refer to the living entities as his potencies, his portions, and so on. They refer to the world also as his potency, his portion, his opulences, and so on. So in that way, the Upanishads, they teach the nature of the Supreme Lord, the nature of this world, and the nature of the living entities. But there are people who don't understand the nature of these statements, and they come up with misconceptions of Nirvishesha Jnana, impersonal philosophies. So actually, and that entire book is basically an analysis of the key teachings of the Upanishads, Vedanta Sangraha. He refutes Mayavada in great detail. Then afterwards, he proceeds to point out the actual intent of the Upanishads. Srila Saraswati Thakur wanted to establish the Shastriya version, the scriptural version, that all Shastras are glorious because they glorify Hari. Therefore, the Upanishads are treasured by genuine devotees who do not relegate them to the domain of speculative jnanis. He would quote the Upanishadic utterance, Sarve Veda Yat Padamamananti, referring to the object, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, about which all the Vedas speak, and the Gita Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita, wherein Lord Krishna declares, Vedeshya Sarvair Ahameva Vedyaha, all Vedic literature is meant for knowing me. He thus demonstrated that although most of the Upanishads appear not to indicate Krishna, he is their only subject matter. The indirect approach of the Upanishads is paroksha, mysterious or encrypted, and is dear to Krishna. That it is dear to Krishna is directly stated by Krishna in Uddhava Gita. The Upanishads can be accepted in opposite ways. One that increases devotion, and another that leads away from devotion, according to the attitude of the student. There are two kinds of education systems. There is one by which you can attain knowledge, understanding, and realization of the Supreme Absolute Truth. And there is another through which you do not attain knowledge, understanding, and realization of the Supreme Absolute Truth, but you are just stuck with the immediate meaning of the scriptures. These are all very elaborately pointed out by the acharyas, actually. Acharya, Ramanujacharya, they analyze these in great detail. And Jiva Goswami abundantly talks about this. Also, Govinda Bhashya, other literature. At Radha Kund in 1935, Srila Saraswati Thakur further expounded this theme in a series of speeches explaining Shuddha Bhakti through the Upanishads. The Upanishads are very important. The Upanishads, in fact, have been summarized in chapter 87 of the 10th canto, the prayers of the personified Vedas. If you see Prabhupada's presentation of the Krishna book, the prayers of the personified Vedas occupy 100 pages, even though it just has some 50 shlokas. Prabhupada has chosen to explain it in sufficient detail. That chapter in Krishna book should be studied thoroughly. Anyone who wants to understand the real teaching of the Upanishads should study that. He opened by quoting Srila Rupa Goswami on how the Upanishads worship the holy name of Krishna. Nikhil Shruti Mauli Ratna Mala Jutinira Jutapada Pankajanta Aimukta Kulai Rupasya Manam Paritas Twam Harinama Samshrayami. O Harinam, the tips of the toes of your lotus feet are constantly worshipped by the radiance emanating from the string of gems known as the Upanishads, the crown jewels of all the Vedas. You are eternally adored by liberated souls. O Harinama, I take complete shelter of you. So now here, if you see the first sentence of this translation, it's clear that the Upanishads are actually talking about the importance of chanting the holy names of the Supreme Lord Hari. Otherwise, why would Rupa Goswami write something like this? He would have said, your tips are, your lotus feet are worshipped by Bhagavatam, he could have said. No, but he's saying the Upanishads. In one of these lectures, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati spoke from the first 3 verses of Ishopanishad, on which he was writing a commentary. In another, he demonstrated how Gaura Tattva is described in the Upanishads. And in a third, he addressed the question of Leela not being openly described in the generally acknowledged corpus of Shruti. By following the conclusion established by Srila Jiva Goswami in Tattva Sandarbha, that Srimad Bhagavatam rather than Shruti is the topmost Vedic evidence, he refuted the epistemology of those who consider themselves orthodoxly Vedic. He refuted the proposals of those who consider themselves to be full-fledged Vedic scholars and who accept only the teachings of the 4 Vedas. And who think that that is the proper way to go. Actually, the Shruti is meant to be understood through the Itihasas, Puranas, Dharma Shastras, beginning with the Manu Samhita and so on. The outlook of Shruti, quote, the outlook of Shruti does not oppose acceptance of the pastimes of Bhagavan. Yet, since Shruti is merely the first step in spiritual education, Leela has not been clearly treated therein. The purpose of Shruti is to vanquish the attitude of enjoying sense gratification, for without such preliminary preparation, it is not possible to approach transcendental Leela. End of quote. Debunking a common misconception, the harmonist essay Vishnu and Vaishnava demonstrated that Vishnu Bhakti is positively and amply described in the four Vedas. And to the frequent challenge that chanting the holy names, including the Mahamantra, was a recently introduced practice not mentioned in the Vedas, Srila Saraswati Thakur would reply with evidence from Rig Veda that the name of Vishnu is not only mentioned but highly glorified in the Vedas. Om Asya Jananto Namachid Vivaktan Mahaste Vishnu Sumatim Bhajamahe. Om Tat Sat. O Vishnu, your name is transcendental and thus self-manifest. Even without properly comprehending the glories of chanting your holy name, if we vibrate your name with at least a little insight into its glories, that is, if we simply repeat the syllables of your holy name, we shall gradually understand. This is brought out in Haribhakti Vilas, explained by Sanatana Goswami, is also brought out by Srila Jiva Goswami and Bhagavad Sandarbha and explained. As further testament, end of quote. As further testament that the Mahamantra is found in the Vedas, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati quoted the Kalisantarana Upanishad in which the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is mentioned. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Iti Shodashakam Namnam, Kali Kalmasha Nashanam, Natah Parataropaya Sarvavedeshu Drishyate. The 16 names of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare, destroy all the contamination inherent to Kali Yuga. This is the conclusion of all the Vedas. End of quote. And he clarified how the nature of the Mahamantra is distinct from other Vedic mantras. Quote, mantra means that which delivers a mind from the mental plane. Vedic mantras are characterized by having 4 lines and such invocatory terms as Namaha and Swaha. The Mahamantra is different from other mantras. Comprised of the names of Bhagavan, it is meant for calling out to him. It is more powerful than any other mantra or process. Srila Jiva Goswami also points out that these Vedic mantras are all Namatmaka mantras. They have the holy name as their very Atma. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This is a mantra, we know this. In this, Vasudevaya is derived from the holy name Vasudeva. But in the Hare Krishna mantra is not a Namatmaka mantra. It is a Namamaya mantra. It is a the mantra is entirely the holy name. It is not the soul of the holy name. The holy name is entirely the mantra. The holy name is not the soul of the mantra. The holy name itself is a mantra. Hare is a name, Krishna is a name, Rama is a name. In Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, you have Om. Of course, Om is the name of Lakshmi Narayan or Sitaram or Radha Krishna, Rukmini Krishna, Radha Krishna, and so on. But Namo Bhagavate, these are all other parts of the mantra. So you have a soul and you have a body for a Namatmaka mantra. But the Mahamantra is a Namamaya mantra. It is just the holy names. Just all of these holy names put together is a mantra. So it is a Mahamantra. Exoteric matters. Exoteric means matters concerning anything which is external. Appearance and dress. At just over 6 feet in height, Srila Saraswati Thakur was considerably taller than most Bengalis. His arms were long and his form gracile. Graceful. His complexion was fair and his forehead broad. Normally he wore unassuming sannyasi attire consisting of top and bottom pieces of non-stitched cotton dyed cotton dyed red, and sometimes a Punjabi. And in winter, a coat, cardigan, or chador. Cardigan, a usually collarless sweater or jacket that opens the full length of the center front. 3 strands of tulsi beads adorned his neck, and an upavita, Brahmin thread, hung either over his shoulder and across his chest or was sometimes looped around his neck. He almost always wore simple round spectacles, in later life bifocals. He would sit with his back erect, not leaning on anything for support, and typically appeared grave. His skin was so delicate that even the slightest touch would redden it. Devotees who touched his lotus feet found them to be soft like butter. Plain wooden sandals were his normal footwear. His tilak, formed of sacred gopi chandan clay, was always straight and neat, even though he applied it without using a mirror. He did not like to be seen without tilak, and after bathing, he would apply it before letting anyone see him. In later life, he took a walking stick when going outside, and in rain or strong sunlight, a disciple would hold an umbrella over him. For special occasions, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati sometimes dressed opulently with leather shoes, a plush gown or long coat, and a turban. Usually, only when dressing formally did he wear his wristwatch. In that era, a status symbol unexpected of sadhus. Since it was customary to offer gifts of cloth to sadhus, Srila Saraswati Thakur mostly wore clothes given to him by devotees. Daily activities. Although fully engaged in preaching, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did not neglect basic devotional practices. He was simultaneously absorbed in cultivating and also distributing Shuddha Bhakti, and did not waste a moment in anything else. He rose early, typically by 2 o'clock or at the latest 3:30. After bathing and so forth, he chanted japa, and at 4:30 attended Mangalarati. If not otherwise engaged, then after morning temple services, he usually dictated essays and book manuscripts to Vasudev Prabhu, who would transcribe them. When writing, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati preferred a wooden table and chair rather than sit on the floor. After lunch, he dictated letters before conducting Ishtagoshti with his disciples. Around 4 o'clock, he would again bathe. Srila Saraswati Thakur liked to take a late afternoon stroll. In Puri, he would saunter up and down the beach. He would walk about in a leisurely manner. He would stroll up and down the beach. In Mayapur, on the road in front of the Mutt, and in Sri Gaudiya Mutt, along the balcony. Sri Gaudiya Mutt refers to Calcutta. Just a minute. Along the balcony, or sometimes throughout the compound. While walking, he would chant japa or Shastriya verses, scriptural verses, or if accompanied by a few disciples or visitors, discuss topics of Krishna or how to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. In the evening, he sometimes attended Aarti and delivered a lecture, but more often he met guests or spoke to senior disciples. After supper, at around 9 o'clock, he would speak with visitors or again walk back and forth outside his room. He would retire around 11 o'clock. Chapter 9, the Gaudiya Mutt. By establishing over 60 Gaudiya Mutt branches, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati created opportunities for both nunciants and householders to execute the 5 primary activities of Shuddha Bhakti as enunciated by Lord Chaitanya. Sadhu Sangha Nama Kirtan Bhagavat Shravan Mathuravas Srimurtir Shraddhai Sevan Sakal Sadhana Shrestha Ei Pancha Anga Krishna Prema Janmai Ei Pancher Alpa Sangha. Associating with devotees, chanting the holy names, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, residing at Mathura, and worshipping the deity with faith. These 5 are the best limbs of sadhana. Even a slight performance of these five wakens Krishna Prema as the key to engaging people in the bona fide principles of sadhana bhakti. Srila Saraswati Thakur provided authentic sadhu sangha in contrast to the prevalent cheating varieties. This genuine sadhu sangha was the key to performing the other four vital activities, which could not be effectively undertaken without the association of bona fide devotees. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati delineated his mission by stating that the four tasks given by Lord Chaitanya to Sanatana Goswami, rediscovering and reviving lost holy places, preaching Bhakti Siddhanta, the conclusions of Bhakti, establishing Vaishnava behavior and society, and revealing service to deities, were also bequeathed to himself and his followers, and that by performing these activities during this lifetime, devotees would achieve Lord Chaitanya's blessings for the next. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur had criticized as being against the spirit of renunciation the practice of putative, so-called vairagis, erecting akhras, monasteries, so as to take advantage of Hindu sentiment for giving donations and thereby procure a regular income for cushy living, comfortable living. Some people accused that the Gaudiya monks, with their facilities for residence and cooking, were a similar compromise between renounced and family life. But quoting from a song by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati would say that the Gaudiya Math was Krishna's samsar, Krishna's home, Krishna's family. Every Mathvasi, every resident of his Matha, monastery, was to perform every activity solely for the pleasure of the household proprietors, namely the deities, Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari. That is, Gandharvika is Radharani, Giridhari is Lord Krishna. Thus, Mathavasa was equated with Vrajavasa. In the Matha or monastery, only men were living, celibate men, in fact. Householders were living at homes, which were different. They were not living in the monastery, they were not living in the Math. Ladies were living in homes, they were not living in this arrangement within the Math. The sublime purpose for which Gaudiya Math branches were established was summarized in the Gaudiya upon the inauguration of the Sri Sanatan Gaudiya Math in Banaras. Bharata bhumite hoila manushya janma jar, janma sarthaka kori koro para upakar. One who has taken birth as a human being in Bharatavarsha should make his life successful and work for the benefit of others. To fulfill, this is also continuation of the quote. To fulfill that instruction, this Math has been founded. The purpose of Sri Sanatan Gaudiya Math is to practice achar and preach, prachar, Sanatan Gaudiya Vaishnava Dharma, the eternal Gaudiya Vaishnava Dharma. For almost half a century, these associates of Gauranga, preached door to door to all people the practiced and preached message of Shuddha Bhakti of Sri Gaurasundar, who had descended with his Dham. Sri Gaurasundar is not merely the worshipable god of Bengalis. His teachings are not merely a sectarian dogma. Sri Gaurasundar's pastimes of practicing and preaching Krishna consciousness are not temporary, but are for all places at all times and are the only acceptable method for all people equally. This should be made known to the inhabitants of the universe. In every town and village on earth, my name will be proclaimed for preaching Sanatan Dharma and Shuddha Bhakti, so that all people in the universe would know these teachings. The personal associates of Gauranga, under the guidance of the Acharya, established a preaching center at Banaras, a holy place where Lord Chaitanya and his devotees had placed their lotus feet. This Matha was named Sri Sanatan Gaudiya Matha and was established on the 13th of the month of Vaishakh, 1333 Bengali era, 13 May 1926, 440 years after the appearance of Gauranga. End of quote. Srila Saraswati Thakur commented on the quality of association that the Gaudiya Matha afforded. Quote, we were thinking it highly unlikely that we could be blessed by the audience of such immaculately perfect personalities as those who appeared at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But fortunately, Sri Gaurasundar has caused us to meet such great souls who are in no way less than the devotees of the period of his manifested pastimes, for they are always engaged in Hari Bhajan and Hari Kirtan. Considering myself weak, I was afraid that after the departure of my Gurudev, I would be unable to hear his katha and therefore would follow the wrong course. But now my Gurudev has taken many avatars and is present before me in many forms to perform kirtan and read and explain Bhagavatam to me. When by their explanations ever new and when by their explanations ever new and approved by my Gurudev, they bring life to my dead body, then I gain consciousness. Thus I have the good fortune to be occupied 24 hours daily in Shravan and Kirtan of Hari Katha. End of quote. Recalling his lone struggle in the early days at the Yoga Peeth, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati remarked in a 1933 lecture, Sri Gaurasundar has sent hundreds of qualified persons to help me, every one of whom is competent to fulfill the Manobhishta, the cherished ambition of Sri Gaurasundar. In Delhi, a young man asked, why do you claim that the Gaudiya Math is the only way to God? Is there really no other path? Srila Saraswati Thakur answered, do you think there can be any method to approach God other than associating with those whom Godhead himself has selected for his service? And in a lecture, he stated similarly, quote, non-devotees will say, is your path the only way? Is only the Gaudiya Matha performing religious activities? We will reply, yes, our Vaishnava Dharma is the only Dharma. Whenever you become fortunate, either in this birth or another, you will be able to understand this. End of quote. The harmonist clarified, quote, the activities of the Gaudiya Math are categorically different from the ordinary activities of this world. They are also different from worldly activities that are conducive under the sanction of the scriptures to the attainment of spiritual service. The activities of the Gaudiya Math are the transcendental function itself, to which the worldly functions have to be subordinated for the gradual attainment of the summum bonum. The Gaudiya Matha is therefore a truly unique institution. It is different from all secular institutions and also from all religious institutions that practice worldly activities under spiritual sanction. End of quote. Notwithstanding this declaration of spiritual singularity, much of what the Gaudiya Matha did was in simulation of and counteraction to the Ramakrishna mission. The main orchestrator of Gaudiya Matha activities, Kunja Bihari Prabhu, had formerly frequented the Ramakrishna mission, which by expert organization and management had established many mathas, published numerous books and journals, and become so highly respected and popular, especially in Bengal, that few people could even begin to hear any criticism of it. Kunja Bihari Prabhu envisioned comparable success for the Gaudiya Math by fashioning it along similar lines. And even though the two societies were almost totally opposed philosophically, many of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's innovations to the Gaudiya world, mathas, sannyasis, use of modern conveyances and contraptions, devices, overseas propaganda, and indeed the whole pattern of cultural detente. Wait, I'll get back with that. The relaxation of strained relations or tensions with rather than withdrawal from the contemporary world had already been effectively launched by the Ramakrishna mission. Despite its regimented character, the Gaudiya Matha had no written constitution or charter, nor a defined polity. Srila Saraswati Thakur was referred to as its President Acharya. There should be no dash about this finally. And Kunja Bihari Prabhu as its secretary, although neither function bore a defined portfolio, being the Matharakshaka. Matharakshaka means protector of the Matha of Sri Gaudiya Matha. Kunja Bihari Prabhu oversaw the Matharakshaka of each other Matha and was himself overseen by Srila Saraswati Thakur, who, albeit despite delegating most of day-to-day administration to Kunja Bihari Prabhu and other leading disciples, kept abreast of and was involved in the workings of the institution. Although spread throughout India and beyond, with many situated in materialistic metropolises, the Gaudiya Matha branches were all connected to and had their spiritual roots in Sri Mayapur Dham, specifically via Sri Chaitanya Matha. The Gaudiya Matha was declared the instrument and counterpart of His Divine Grace Parivrajacharya Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. It lives and moves and has its being in the founder Acharya and identical with its founder Acharya. The associates, followers, and abodes of His Divine Grace are limbs of Himself. All procedures and undertakings of the Gaudiya Matha were rooted in eternal principles through the medium of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the then current link in the chain of spiritual preceptors. Quote, all activity of the Gaudiya Matha emanates from His Divine Grace Paramahamsa Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, spiritual successor of Sri Rupa Goswami, who was originally authorized by Sri Chaitanya Dev to explain the process of loving spiritual devotion for the benefit of all souls. The reality of the whole activity of the Gaudiya Matha depends on the initiative of the Acharya. End of quote. In their solid philosophical basis and spirit of dynamic, dedicated service, the Gaudiya Mathas and their indwellers reflected Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's specific approach to bhakti and were manifestations of his unlimited desire to serve Hari Guru Vaishnavas in unlimited ways, especially by promulgating their message, especially by propagating their message, the message of Hari Guru Vaishnavas. All endeavors centered on service to Hari Guru Vaishnavas performed in two main divisions, Kirtana and Archana, of which Kirtana was principal. Quote, Shri Shri Radha Govinda are the center of all activities of the Gaudiya Matha. The inmates have no other duty excepting the service of Shri Shri Radha Govinda. The service of Shri Shri Radha Govinda consists of two distinct functions, Kirtana and Archana. Archana is the ordinary form of worship. It appeals directly to all the senses. The holy forms of Shri Shri Radha Govinda stand manifest to our view, ready to accept our service. This is effected in a very simple way. The worshipper regards himself as a servant of Shri Shri Radha Govinda. The house belongs to the Lord. The food is prepared for the Lord. Money is employed for the maintenance of the household of the Lord. The servant may accept only after the Lord has been served, whatever the Lord is pleased to allow for his maintenance. The servant must have no relationships except for the service of the Lord. He has to procure the necessaries, that means the necessities, for the service of the Lord by begging from door to door, as it is the only duty of every person to give voluntarily their all for the service of the Lord with no expectation of any return. They are to offer to the Lord whatever is obtained in this way and reserve nothing for their own personal use. They are to accept whatever may be given to them from day to day by the Lord for their maintenance, but they must not have any thoughts for their own maintenance. This is realized in practice by unconditional submission to the Acharya. Archana is properly performed only if it be constantly kept alive by means of Kirtana. The Gaudiya Matha provides for the constant Kirtana of the name, form, quality, activity, and the specific service of the devotees of Godhead. They are simultaneously distinct and identical, and also inconceivable except by grace. Kirtana thus constitutes the fundamental activity of the Gaudiya Matha. Logo. Designed by Srila Saraswati Thakur, the Gaudiya Matha logo depicted Bhagavata Marga, the path of devotion centered on Shravana and Kirtana, culminating in spontaneous devotion, Raga Bhakti, and Pancharatrika Marga, the path of bhakti according to scripturally prescribed regulations, Vidhi Marga centered on Archana, functioning side by side. So here is the logo. Here is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Here Guru Gaudiya. They are here. Here is a Vaishnava Tilak, Gaudiya Vaishnava Tilak. Here is a book in which it is written Bhagavatam. Here is a book in which it is written Pancharatram. And here we have Radha Krishna. And here we have Lakshmi Narayana. Here is written Ragaha, signifying that this is the Raga Marga. Here it is written Vidhihi, signifying that this is the Vidhi Marga. Here we have Kirtanam, in which you have Mridanga. Kirtanam is also written here in Devanagari. That's a printing press. Here you have Archanam written in Devanagari. There's a bell and Arati paraphernalia. Here are the 6 opulences of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They're indicated in Sanskrit. Om is written here and Nama is written here. That's in the center. So here you see Raga Bhakti is on this side, one the lower right. Vidhi Bhakti is on the left, side by side. The words thereon were written either in Sanskrit, Devanagari or Bengali script. The right side represents Bhagavata or Raganuga Marga, and the left Pancharatrika or Vidhi Marga or Vaidhi Marga. In the top segment stands Lord Chaitanya, his hand upraised, encouraging everyone to join in Kirtan. To his left is the Srimad Bhagavatam. Below, in the 3 o'clock position, stands Sri Radha Krishna and the word Raga, signifying Raga Marga. Beneath them is a printing press, a Mridanga, and the word Kirtanam, signifying that both chanting the names of Krishna to the accompaniment of Mridanga and printing books about Krishna are forms of Kirtana. This combination being the chief sadhana for Raganuga Bhaktas. At the bottom is a tilak symbol and the words Guruhu and Gaudiyaha. You need to serve the Gaudiyas and the Guru. To the left are a bell and the word Archanam and a ghee lamp. Above these are Sri Lakshmi Narayana upon a throne and the word Vidhihi, indicating the mode for worshipping them. Over them is the Pancharatram, the book, which describes the process of Archana. Within the 6 triangles forming a star in the center are words denoting the 6 prominent opulences of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. From the top proceeding clockwise, Yashaha, fame, Shri, beauty, Jnanam, knowledge, Vairagyam, renunciation, Aishwaryaha, wealth, and Viryaha, strength. Written in the center of the star is Om Nam. Om is generally taken as the non-specific sound representation of the absolute truth, but is understood by Vaishnavas to be Bhagavan and his internal potency. Akareno Chate Vishnu, Sarvalokaika Ukareno Chate Lakshmi. Om is a combination of 3 letters, the letter A, the letter U, the letter Ma. Makareno Chate Jiva Tayo Dasaha. The letter A indicates the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The letter U, U refers to the Supreme Lord's consort. The letter Ma refers to the living entity who is their eternal servant. Nama is the specific name of the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead Shri Krishna, and being non-different from him, is the possessor of the 6 opulences. Regarding the Gaudiya Math logo, a Pandit once asked Srila Saraswati Thakur, all the depictions are traditionally Indian except the printing press. Why have we kept this foreign item here, item there? Srila Saraswati Thakur answered, anything used for Lord Chaitanya's Kirtan is neither foreign nor Indian, but aprakrita, non-material. When used in Krishna's service, the press is as sacred as the Arati paraphernalia or the khol and kartals, the mridanga and the kartals. Daily schedule. Each morning at 4 o'clock, the large bell hanging in each mutt was rung to wake still sleeping Mathavasis. Sometimes, Srila Saraswati Thakur himself would go to the Natya Mandir and wake whoever was still sleeping there. Next was a program of spiritual services continuing for several hours, with some variations in the format and timings between different mathas. Generally in summer, morning functions were held a little earlier and evening functions a little later. A typical day in each Gaudiya Matha began shortly after rising. Devotees would congregationally sing Guru Ashtaka by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So this explodes the misconception that Guru Ashtaka was introduced by Prabhupada inside his home. Vaishnava Vandana by Devaki Nandan Das, which offers respects to all Vaishnavas. And then Sri Guru Parampara, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Saraswati Thakur's composition describing the Brahmamadhva Gaudiya succession, utterance of which fulfilled the requirement that every disciple within every sampradaya must early each morning recite the names of prominent acharyas in his parampara from its inception to the present. Then Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat was read for a few minutes. This was followed by Mangalarti at 4:30. Attendance was compulsory. Any devotee who had not bathed by 4:30 due to sickness or late rising would stand at the back hugging the wall, far away from those who had bathed and donned fresh cloth. Allowed. Allowed. That is something very interesting. Even the very strict Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur allowed this. During Mangalarti, the first prayer sung was Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Arati Kirtan, beginning Bhale Gora Godadharer Arati Nehari, followed by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Jivedaya Kari, the opening prayer of Sharanagati. Then Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta was chanted once or twice, and for the remaining few minutes, Kirtan of the Mahamantra. Upon completion of the Arati and Kirtan, Jayadhwani was recited. Next was Parikrama of the Deities, performed 4 times, accompanied by Kirtan, which would continue briefly after the circumambulations, and often was Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's composition, beginning Bhajare, Bhajare Amar Manati Manda, or other songs. Next was Tulasi Arati, performed along with the chanting of Sri Chandrasekhar Kavi's orison. Prayer that begins Namo Namah Tulasi Maharani. A light breakfast of Mahaprasad was served between approximately 7 o'clock and 8, although many devotees skipped this. By 7:30, most went out for bhiksha, fundraising, returning around noon, while others remained behind to perform other services. While Bhoga was being offered at midday, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Kirtan, Bhoga Arati would be sung, and during the Arati that followed, his Yashomati Nandan. Then the deities' altar was closed for their midday rest, whereupon the devotees together honored a full meal of Mahaprasad, the serving and honoring of which Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati sometimes personally supervised. Each afternoon, from approximately 2 o'clock till 3, Mathavasis assembled for Ishtagoshti, which opened with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's song that begins Jai Jai Harinam Chidanandam Mrita Dham from Sri Namashtaka. Bhaktivinoda Thakur's own Bengali versified rendition of the Namashtaka of Rupa Goswami, a composition in praise of the holy name. Next was a question and answer session to help devotees enter more deeply into understanding of Bhaktisiddhanta, especially as applicable in the preaching field. When going for bhiksha, if devotees were stumped by queries or challenges, they would promise to return the next day with answers given by Srila Saraswati Thakur, Srimad Tirtha Maharaj, Bhakti Pradip Tirtha Maharaj, or other sannyasis and senior devotees. In these meetings, the devotees also discussed philosophical books, notably Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sri Chaitanya Shikshamrita and Jaiva Dharma. After dark, Mathavasis were required to remain within the compound as per the Vedic injunction for brahmacharis residing at Gurukula. They would attend the evening arati, during which were sung 2 arati kirtans of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Those beginning Jaya Jaya Gora Chander Arati Kashobha, which we do also, and Jaya Jaya Radha Krishna Jugala Milan, followed by the chanting of Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda and the Mahamantra. After Arati came Jayadhwani, Parikrama, and Kirtan performed while sitting. So Kirtan performed while sitting was also authorized by Srila Saraswati Thakur. for particular circumstances, particular activities. Then Harikatha was given by Srila Saraswati Thakur or some other leading devotee. This evening program also attracted visitors and local Grihastha disciples. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati instructed that all devotees, brahmacharis, grihasthas and sannyasis, even if they happen to miss other functions, should attend the morning and evening aratis, for they incorporate several essential bhakti angas, limbs of devotion, observing the Shastriya rule that prohibits eating in the evening before deities have been put to rest. At about 9 o'clock, devotees again honored Mahaprasad, most taking full meals. Matha standards. Oh, it's 6:30. All right. Let me make a note. Next. Any questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dhanyavad pranam, Yogesh Prabhupada. Thank you for a wonderful class.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Prabhuji, I had a bad internet connection. I missed a little bit of the explanation that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave with respect to these angles, right angles, and etc. I didn't quite get that. Would you be able to just repeat that and perhaps just clarify exactly? I don't think I followed it because I missed it.
When you have two lines, and they're placed in angle, you have lines. We have different. You can create an angle by just with two lines like this, like this, like this, like this, like this. But when you come across exactly fully straight, then you don't have. See, when it is like this, you have a corner. You have a gap here like this. But when you go fully straight, you don't really have a gap. It is just, you can go straight and you can perpetually go on straight and you'll never touch this line. So similarly, Krishna appears to be just another living being, just like us. But his morality is categorically different from the various forms of morality that conditioned souls can come up with. Basically, that's the point that we brought up. Leela Madhuri Lalita Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Prabhu, you were telling that Lord Rama also said the untruth in two situations. One for his father to continue to live and one more for the Brahmanas to go back. So could you please tell me what was the untruth told by Lord Rama?
When Lord Rama was being taken by Sumantra, Ramachandra, Lakshmana and Sita Devi, Sumantra was driving, and at the very last minute, Dasharatha came out of the palace and said, "Stop," because he couldn't tolerate being without Ram. So he told Sumantra, "Stop," and Ramachandra told Sumantra, "Go, continue going." So Sumantra, he looked at Ram and said, "What? I've been ordered to stop by the king. You're ordering me to go." Then Lord Ram told him that you go, and later on when you come back, when he asks you why you didn't stop, so at that time you say that I didn't hear it. I didn't hear what you said. And then he explained that if you actually stop now, anyway I have to go. I have to go because this is a promise. I have to fulfill the promise. I have to go. So if I go, then he will again become disheartened, and then he will experience more pain, and he might die right now. That was one reason. And then when he went, so many Brahmanas from Ayodhya, they were following Lord Ramachandra. They would not, even though Lord Ram told them, please go back, they would not go back. They continued to follow. So in night time, they stayed in one place. And all these people who followed him, they also stayed. So they all went to sleep. And then in the middle of the night, Lord Ram woke up Sumantra, Lakshmana, Sita Devi. And then he said, first of all, he told Sumantra, you take the chariot in one particular direction. And then afterwards, you come back. And then we'll go in some other direction. So when they wake up in the morning, and we'll leave right now. So Sumantra did that. So then they left. And the Lord said, when they wake up, they will follow they will look at the chariot wheels imprints according to the route that Sumantra had taken earlier, which is just some short route somewhere, some small little place, and then coming back. So they will immediately think, oh, Ram has left, let us follow. So they will follow that way, and then finally then they'll understand that Ram has gone, and then they'll go back to Ayodhya. Because if we don't do something like this, then they will not be able to survive, and it is not proper. So it is for that benefit we'll have to do this. So only on 2 occasions Lord Rama did this. That itself goes on to show that under certain circumstances, this kind of behavior for others' life, it is dharmic. It's meant to be done. Yathartha bhashanam bhuta hitakaram cha satyam. Okay. Anything else?
One chapter you told us to refer in Krishna book. Could you
Sorry?
please tell me that? One chapter, one particular chapter.
Prayers
You
by
told us to.
personified Vedas. This is the longest chapter in Krishna book. Very easy to find.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Anything else?
Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Dandatana.
Prabhu, just want to understand, Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj has given importance to this Pancharatra.
Yes.
But Srila Prabhupada has not emphasized this, at least in his Upanishads, his lectures. Want to understand, Prabhu. Am I right in understanding, Prabhu?
In 1969, I found a place where Prabhupada says, I have not even introduced 1% of the rules and regulations. Then by the time he is leaving, he says, I have only given 50%. Plenty of things. But
Okay.
in essence, everything is meant to be followed in a particular manner. It will come. When our devotees become more and more mature, they'll begin to understand which rules, regulations, basically restrictions, which prescriptions are
Prabhu,
helpful for us.
actually, in this connection, Prabhu, actually, Srila Jayapataka Swami, he's holding Jayapataka Swami Maharaj, he said that anybody who chants is automatically becomes a Vaishnava and is above a Brahmana.
Anybody who chants purely,
Purely becomes above a Brahmana.
of course.
So, but we see that even in
But that pure chanting may take several lifetimes to come to.
Okay.
It is not a child's play.
Okay.
Our devotees are beginning to understand the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga over time. Prabhupada actually, he told some of his disciples that you'll all understand the nature of this over the decades. It's a fact. When we take to Krishna consciousness, over 3, 4, 5 decades, then you begin to understand the nature of Krishna consciousness.
Fine, Prabhu. Thank you.
All right. Right, fine. Any further questions? Okay. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha vipasantubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavabhyo namo namaha.